Alright, so there's a good write-up on the Ducati forum on how to install the AIS block-off plates and remove that whole system. But I haven't seen any videos pertaining to this bike specifically, so I've decided to make one trying to detail these steps. So what I'm going to start with is actually going in reverse and removing the plates first, installing the block-off plates, and then once that part's out of the way, we'll see about removing this wiring harness housing, see how much of that I need to get rid of before I can get rid of all the hoses and whatnot. So I've gotten as far as this step, removing the ABS unit with these three 10mm bolts right there to gain access to the right hand side block off plate. Let's see if we can get a shot in there. Here, I'm gonna put the phone down for a second. Once I can move this out of the way, you can see there's the right hand side injection plate. And just a word of caution, everybody that I've read on the forums and whatnot say to leave the reed valves in even when you're putting in the block off plates. Don't know why, nobody seems to say why, but I'm just gonna go ahead and take that advice. So the way I'm gonna start is by getting to that hose clamp, taking that off, removing the hose, and then using an 8mm socket to take off those two bolts. Alright, these two right here, boom and boom, and then install the block off plates. I'm probably just gonna use blue Loctite. Everybody uses red for some reason. I don't feel like that's vibrations are gonna make blue Loctite go anywhere, so I'm just gonna settle for that since that's what I have. So since the write-up, the guy who did the write-up removed all the coolant hoses and whatnot before getting into this, my goal for this video was to see how few things I could remove before getting to the plates. And so far I undid this little bolt right here that connects the ABS unit to its little bracket, and I disconnected the purge valve plug. My goal is to eventually take that out too. Yeah, so I could get a straight Allen key in from under, but I could not get that this direction. But I could fit a little ratchet down there, and so I'm in the process of taking this top bolt out right now. Boom, so I got that bolt off. Let's take a look at what's underneath. Boom. There's the reed valve right there. That's going to stay in when I add on the block off plates. And just because of limited space, I decided to take this plate off before completely removing the clamp and hose. I'm going to take these off now and then install the plates. Okay, so right hand plate is installed. You can see some of the blue Loctite peeking out there. I just went hand tight, about as hand tight as I could, just because getting a ratchet in there is going to be difficult. And I ended up using just this straight tool with a bit at the end and lifting this up and just being sure to not screw all these things up. With this bolt undone right here and this purge plug undone, it gave me plenty of mobility. I could get in there and manipulate it how I needed to get a nice tight grip. That orientation is not arbitrary, it is mandatory. The plate only fits one direction, which was not a big deal. I put it in wrong the first time before realizing, but yeah, just took it out and switched it to the correct direction. We're going for the left-hand side now. As you can see, I have much easier access. Yeah, shouldn't be any trouble for this. Going to do the same process. Cool. This side was super easy. Yeah, same deal. Blue Loctite, hand tight as I could with this tool. Now I'm going to see about removing all the leftover hoses and plugging the electronic motor. So where I need to get is into that blue plug right there. It's right below the air box, and it looks like that is not going to be easily accessible without at least removing much of this part of the wire harness bracket housing. I don't know what you would call that. So I'm going to start from this end, removing stuff, see if I can't just flip this open and get to the part. And then if I cannot, I'm just going to end up removing all this stuff to have much easier access. We'll see how that goes. Alright, so after disconnecting a bunch of plugs, a bunch of retaining bolts, the ECU, and some of the plugs that were attached here, it's still tough to finagle some freedom off of this thing. So I took this nut off. I took this nut off right here, basically to loosen this cover without having to take it off. I'm familiar with lifting up the tank, so really the only thing that's in the way, I think, as far as being able to move this is this little part of the tank right here. So if I pull this forward, shift it down, I can shift this whole deal downward, but I'm still stuck right here. So I feel like if I can just lift the tank, I'll be okay. So I'm going to go ahead and do that just to save myself the trouble of having to get all these things disassembled for access to this. So it's just based on what I'm familiar with, what I've done before. So I'm just going to go with that process. Alright, so lifting up the tank, freed up this little guy. I was able to pull this guy forward. Had a little bit of a scare there because this is meant to be behind that little tab right there. As I pulled it forward, it snapped. It sounded like it broke, but it didn't. So now I can move this whole sucker forward, and I can get into these little Allen key bolts. Feels like 3mm, and I can disconnect this guy right here, and then I should be able to remove the whole system and plug it. So disconnecting this was relatively easy. I just used a screwdriver while I pressured that down to pop it off, a flathead screwdriver. Now this sucker right here, this bolt is insanely long and pretty hard to get to. This one right here. So now that that's movable, there's another identical one, or so it feels like, on the other side. So now I'm going to figure out a way to get to it. Or I may just elect to try and break those brackets off and just permanently pop this sucker off. We'll see. Alright, well, not proud of this, but didn't feel like sitting out in the Texas heat getting eaten by mosquitoes for much longer. So I managed to get this bolt out, but there was so little space in here that I could not get this bolt out. So I took a screwdriver to the center pipe to get a little malleability, and then just use a little mini crowbar to pry it down. And so now I have access to that little bolt. I can take it out. I've already got the plug done. Afterwards I'll fish out what's left in the air box and plug up that hole. Managed to get both of these bolts out. Boom. That took an incredible amount of time. Now I'm just going to plug this up from the outside. The write-up says you can plug it up from the outside. It makes sense since the air is going to be trying to pull it inward. It's also easier to plug it in from the outside, so I'm just going to go ahead and do that since it probably does not make much of a difference. Once this is plugged up and this is plugged in, it's time to reassemble, unless of course you want to do the purge valve removal. Alright, so it's getting late, so I didn't do the process on video, but it's pretty easy. The purge valve was hanging out here vertically. I removed that, unplugged the hoses that were plugged in here and here, and used the Smart Moto kit to plug them up with the little nipples, as you can see. And then I took the purge valve plug and closed the circuit. That was also included with the kit. And then I just used one of these rubber clamps to hook it up here. It has one of these brackets so that you can hook it up to something, but I have yet to find what it would hook up to. So for now, if in case I find it, I'll keep an eye out. But for now, I'm just going to wrap it around the ABS unit plugs. Just add to this little rat's nest over here. That was a lot simpler than I expected. And the Ducati forum guy that did the AIS valve write-up also did a quick write-up on this. Some people said that he was doing it wrong, and then on the next page in the forum, they corrected themselves. I was a little worried about that, but it's all cleared up. That nipple's blocked off. That nipple's blocked off. That's plugged in. And then I previously did a hose reroute from the tank. And all I did was splice and put those hoses together. Let's see, can you see this little Y clamp right here? Boom. There's a little bit more info out there on YouTube, so I'm not going to get too deep into that. However, that was troubling me a little bit, so I decided to make a video on that. You can just look up EVAP canister removal. Hope that helps.